My name is CORI, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hispanic Black Gay Coalition in Boston. Today, we are kicking off a video series based on the Boston mayoral race here in Boston. There's 12 fantastic candidates who we will get to know more about when it comes to LGBT issues, people of color issues, and both as they relate to LGBT people of color. Today, we are here to kick things off with Representative Marty Walsh. On his campaign flyer, he says that he is the neighborhood candidate with a bold vision for Boston. So today, we are in Beacon Hill at Carrie Nation Restaurant to talk about how that applies to LGBT people of color. Let's start the conversation. Thank you, Representative Walsh. Thank you for doing this with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So I just want to hop into the questions a bit. So as currently as a state representative, you have created an amazing track record for creating change in the community. So let's just start by discussing why you want to make the transition from a representative to the next mayor of Boston.
I appreciate it. That's a great question. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for having me today. I'm running for mayor of Boston. I love this city. And for the last 16 years, as you said, I've had the opportunity to be a state representative and work on so many great issues, so many different issues. I've had the chance to be able to work on issues like homelessness, gay marriage, putting the budget together. In some cases, we've been able to have to raise taxes. In other cases, we've been able to lower taxes early in my career. And I've had a great career in Beacon Hill as far as working with all the issues. Now I'd like to take that and expand what I've learned on Beacon Hill to City Hall. And I feel that the challenges that are ahead of us in the city of Boston are a lot of what we've done on Beacon Hill in the past, and I'm looking forward to those challenges. And I'm looking forward to serving the people of the city in all neighborhoods throughout the city. We're a city made up of a lot of different people, and I think that's what makes it so great. We have some big challenges ahead of us, such as the education issue, continuing to improve good quality education in the city of Boston. We also want to continue the good development that's happening in this city. And also we have challenges like finding housing to keep people in this city. And how do we find more housing? And we also have an issue with violence in our city, particularly in the city. And we have to get the answers to those questions so we can set what other people experience in Boston as a great opportunity. I want all Bostonians to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and then you bring up a lot of great issues that I hope we get a chance to talk about. But one of the things you did just mention was how diverse Boston is. And,
really is.
And not only Boston, but your current district of Dorchester is very diverse as well. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how you have juggled that diversity or dealt with that diversity in trying to meet all the needs of these individual constituents, yet bringing them together as one.
Well, I mean, my district, it literally is a microcosm of the city of Boston. I think the city of Boston is 52% people of color, and my district is, I think, roughly 56% people of color. So I think I've had the opportunity for 16 years to be able to represent a lot of different people. And the differences in each neighborhood are very, very different in some cases. And as mayor of Boston, I mean, the challenges aren't going to be different. And as far as the question you asked me about how do I deal with it, it's just accessible to people and willing to have an open mind, willing to be able to listen to the concerns that people have. And if they're looking for services, whether it's basic city services or concerns around legislation, you need to be a person that's willing to listen and take suggestions. And in some cases where I might not agree with someone, try and find common ground. And I've been able to do that as a state rep. And I've been sent back to the legislature 8 times from my district. I'm proud of that.
Wow, great. So I want to go ahead and hop into some specific issues, and let's talk it out. First on my mind is health disparities, and particularly around HIV/AIDS. Overall, Massachusetts has done a pretty good job, at least compared to other states, for reducing the number of new HIV infections. But the only catch is in communities of color, particularly Black and Latino communities, infections are actually on the increase. So my question to you is, why do you think that is? And as mayor, how can you specifically work with Black and Latino communities to help resolve this epidemic?
I mean, I think one of the reasons why this might happen is up until we were able to pass universal health insurance here in Boston, in Massachusetts, lack of health insurance. I think a lot of people didn't have opportunities, weren't employed, they weren't working. And I think by people not working, didn't have health insurance, so people wouldn't go to the doctor on a regular basis. So I think that's one of the reasons in the past. I think a lot of it is people don't feel, and I'm not saying in the minority, in the Black community or the white community or whatever community it is, people in the inner city just generally don't go to the doctor. And I think it's important, we have to help educate people the importance of going for that yearly checkup so you can catch something that you might have before it gets worse. I also think there's an issue with access to healthcare in our communities. I think that in some of our neighborhoods, the health centers is a strong network there. It's a strong, I don't want to call it stable, but it's a strong institution in communities. But we have the greatest hospitals in the world, and some of the people who live in the city don't know how to access those hospitals. By simply walking through the front door, it doesn't even necessarily get you a doctor's appointment, where it might at healthcare. So I think we, as mayor of Boston, I want to educate the residents so that they get the care and the need of services that they deserve.
Great. And I think one of those instances or situations that could prevent someone from getting health insurance or getting quality health insurance can be the ability to just get a quality job.
Absolutely, and that's a big problem in our city. It's particularly in the communities of color.
Absolutely.
And you have an unemployment rate that is 3 and 4 times more than the unemployment rate around the state, and that's unacceptable. And I think one of the things that I want to do as mayor, and one of the things I've done as a state representative, and also as the head of the building trades when I was there, is create programs to allow people the access to those jobs. I created a program in the building trades called Building Pathways, and it was an opportunity, and it's still in existence, which I'm happy. We started about 1.5 years ago, and 55 people, predominantly people of color and women, when I say predominantly, 52 of those have had a chance to get into the building trades. And we need to take programs like that and expand upon it. Now the building trades are a CORI-friendly opportunity for folks. So anyone that might have a CORI, a arrest record, they don't have to worry about it. So we need to have more programs like that. But we also need to go back and work on the schools as well. We have too many kids that are graduating high school, the ones that are graduating or dropping out, that just don't have the ability to be able to get a job and keep a job. And I think a lot of it does is, you're right, it goes back to, I don't know I mean, I think education is the most important piece, but a job will help an awful lot of people get out of some of the turmoil that they're in today.
Okay. Yeah, when we talk about drugs and education, I think for me, just doing this work every day, I see the cycle that it creates. For example, if someone's getting bullied or harassed because their day at school, they're less likely to go or to drop out or be able to focus on them to get good grades, which could then impact their ability to graduate and get a job. Can't get a job, then you may resort to selling drugs as a way of survival. So how can we, knowing that education is one of the foundations to help prevent all of those things, how can we, how will you as mayor create better conditions in our schools for LGBT people of color to be themselves?
No, absolutely, and it starts at the top. I mean, I think it starts with the superintendent as far as getting the message down. And today, what I see a lot is cyberbullying. Where years ago was kind of the pushing around bullying in the hallways and on the street. Today we have cyberbullying, and people have to understand how hurtful that is. And people also, kids and parents have to understand there are going to be consequences. We're going to have consequences here for folks. And I remember early in my career, I went to the Walsh house, and I had a chance to go and visit a bunch of kids that would live there, that transgender children, teenagers, And I had a chance to sit down in a room. We talked, we opened up, we had a good discussion. I talked a little bit about my personal life as far as in recovery, and the room opened up, and I was listening to the kids in that room talking about what they were facing at home, the abuses they had at home because they were in this home, and the abuses they had in school. And I just, from that point on, it changed me in a lot of ways in my political career, as far as some of the positions I've taken and roles I've had. Like seeing these young people, trying to explain to me what it's like to live being transgender or being gay. And I think that we have to do a better job of making sure that all people are treated equal. I actually think that the biases of the gay community in Boston in some cases have gone away, and I find a lot of the younger people, when I say this, I don't mean it, more open to it and more accepting today. But there clearly is still some issues out there. We have to do a better job. And as mayor of Boston, I won't stand for it.
Great. And as you're clearly pointing out through some of these answers, you have been an amazing ally to the LGBT community in the past. I mean, as far back as 2007, you voted against a constitutional amendment to define marriage as between a man and a woman. So, just tell me a little bit about your values that made that vote so easy, or go the way it did for you.
Well, when I sat in the legislature in 1997, there was a lot of discussion on Beacon Hill about domestic partner benefits. And there was a bill filed, and the leaders and the legislature was always going to take a stance on domestic partner benefits.
Yeah.
And I just found it odd that we could never come to, well, we never came to a vote. We could never come to an agreement. And you know, almost everybody was in agreement that we should extend domestic partner benefits. At that same time, as we went through the budgets, I started to get involved in issues, particularly around the substance abuse community. We were talking about AIDS and AIDS funding. And I was able to work to get some funding into the line items over the course of my career. But as we went through the legislative process, and year after year, civil unions became an issue. And a piece of legislation was filed on civil unions. And I felt that that was a good next step, even though we never took the first step by allowing domestic partner benefits. I thought civil unions was the best natural step for it. And the bill was filed, and we were never able to get anything accomplished up in the legislature by passing that legislation. So when the Massachusetts Supreme Court came down with the ruling on gay marriage, you know, immediately, right off the bat, I was asked by Representative Liz Marty would I support the bill. I said absolutely, and it's the right thing to do. The only thing that I regret there is that I think the legislature should have gotten to that point, and not the courts. But if we're waiting for the legislature, we'd still be probably debating domestic partner benefits in Massachusetts. But it was an easy vote for me. You know, it's a civil right, and I view the gay marriage whole debate as the last civil right debate in this country. And I've said it publicly, and I've said it not before I started running for mayor. That's my proudest vote, because I was able to have somebody keep a right. I didn't give somebody a right. We didn't give somebody a right. We were able to keep that right. And you know, you don't have many of those votes in your career that you have that affects you, people such as that, the gay marriage debate, the gay marriage vote. So I'm very proud of that vote.
Great. And I think a lot of times when we talk about gay marriage, it's everywhere in the media. It's at the forefront of what many would call the mainstream LGBT movement, that we often neglect other issues, and it can become the all or nothing for us. But included in that, for the LGBT community, is transgender equality and rights and advancement. So I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about, as mayor, what would you prioritize for moving the transgender community forward?
I mean, I think that Mayor Menino has done a great job around the transgender community. At least I've heard that. I don't think that would change much as far as what Mayor Menino supported. You know, I would be supportive I'm supportive now, so I'm not going to change. I'm very so I think that's the best answer I can give. I certainly would be willing to sit down, and if the legislation right now on Beacon Hill, that I know that we did some legislation last year, and I was part of a group that actually sat with the leadership of the House to move some legislation out of committee, and we were able to get some legislation out last year and passed in the legislature. And there's currently a piece of legislation right now back in the legislature. And I'd work with the leadership of the House as mayor of Boston. I would use whatever influence I have to work with the legislative leaders up on Beacon Hill to move any type of piece of legislation, whether it was protections or rights or whatever the legislation might be. And I think that that's one of the greatest strengths. And also, as mayor of Boston, I would be willing to go down to Washington, D.C. to move Congress and the United States Senate in the direction that we want in Massachusetts. Great.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about race. How would you describe race relations in the city of Boston?
I mean, we had a conversation about this today. I mean, I think I don't see an issue in Boston, and I think the fact that in this race for mayor, there are 12 candidates of very different ethnic backgrounds, and you have 5 candidates of color. 7 candidates that would be white, I guess, if you will, and you have a lot of different, I guess, I don't know if nationalities is the right connection, but a lot of different affiliations with the candidates, and I think that's a statement in itself to Boston. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood that was always very diverse. I mean, it never was, you know, very white or very black or very Vietnamese. It's always been a very mixed neighborhood in a good way, and we never had that problem in my neighborhood. We never had an issue around race. I think in Boston, I think there are some feelings out there, though, however, in the black community, rightfully so, that sometimes the black community is underrepresented. And I think that's right. I think when it comes to education, we need to make sure that we build on new schools in neighborhoods and put good administration in those schools so parents feel that they have a choice in their community. I think when it comes, we talked about employment earlier, employment opportunities. We need to make sure that when an opportunity for employment comes to the city, whether it be Vertex Pharmaceutical on the waterfront or Liberty Mutual, that those industries reaches into all the neighborhoods of Boston, not certain neighborhoods of Boston. So I think some of the feelings that people in the communities of color, in the Dudley area, I represent Common Square area, Old Geneva. I think that there are some concerns there, and rightfully so.
Okay, great. So I kind of want to continue on that as we talk about, the culture in our different neighborhoods and preserving that, or making sure folks are reinvesting in that. I actually want to read a short quote from you from your kickoff speech on May 4th, and you're talking about gentrification, and you say too many families are being priced out of neighborhoods they grew up in. And the question for you is, as mayor, you have to think about a lot, right? You have to think about economics, the impact of economic investment in particular communities and what that can mean overall for the city of Boston versus preserving the cultural heritage of a particular community. So given you seem you are in support of preserving cultural heritage in communities, how will you balance those two? What's going to be your overall approach to that issue?
I think one of the ways is by doing that with a job. I know that folks in the Dudley Square area are concerned about some of the development coming to the neighborhood. It's good. People want development there. But I think the people that lived in the long-time residents are concerned about, over time, will they be forced to move out of their property if they don't own their home, if they're renters. And I think sometimes the success of a community allows people to say, well, my neighborhood's successful now, so I'm going to sell my house because there's a want, there's a demand for the supply. So I think the best way of resolving what I said there as far as housing in neighborhoods is by making sure people have opportunities to access a good job. Not just a job, a good job. Not just a summer job or a part-time job or a seasonal job. An actual job where you can raise a family on, where you will have health benefits to deal with the issues we talked about earlier as far as having health care. I think they're all important, and I think it's something that we really have to focus on. And the city to some point is focused on it now, but even looking at attracting more industry to a neighborhood so people can live in a neighborhood, work in their neighborhood, and keep their family in the neighborhood. I think that's an important piece.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm going to use that to segue into discussing a little bit about formerly incarcerated people. And a reason why that is a topic we'd like to talk about is earlier this year, HBGC, with an organization called Black and Pink, hosted a summit for formerly incarcerated LGBT people, and it was a way to provide legal, social resources to help them in society, but also a platform to talk about their demands or their needs as formerly incarcerated people. So I want to just read off maybe 9 or 10 things that came from their demand for policymakers, and I would love to just get your gut reaction and how, as mayor, you may be able to support making some of these things a reality. So they are respect for gender identity and expression of prisoners, LGBT inclusive healthcare in jails, decriminalization of sex work, the elimination of CORI, criminal background checks.
Elimination completely?
Elimination completely.
Yeah, we don't be supportive of that.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
And I don't know what the first one was. What's the
before that was decriminalization of sex work, so prostitution.
Okay.
Hold judges accountable for the treatment of defendants, smaller caseload for public defenders in ESCOM, secure communities, and more funding for HIV programs in jail.
I support that one.
Okay, is that the only one you support?
Well, I mean, it's a very vague. I mean, it's a very broad list of concerns, I guess, if you will. I mean, I'd have to have a conversation and talk more about it, but I certainly support reentry programs.
Okay.
Most people don't end up in jail for doing something right. I mean, they end up in jail for doing something wrong, and it's a punishment. And I'm not a big proponent of sending everyone to jail. I think somebody who has an addiction sometimes will cause petty crime. They'll end up in jail. And I think there's better ways of looking at why and how people end up in jail. I have actually filed legislation regarding sentence reform and looking at people that have an addiction, rather than send them to jail because they're a criminal, try and send them to treatment first, and maybe a second or third time. But I also, you know, when you end up in jail, there's usually a reason why you end up there. I supported CORI reform here in Massachusetts. I certainly don't agree with getting rid of CORI. I think there's a reason. When you commit a crime, that's part of, I guess, what you have, the punishment. But we have the lenience. We've got a little more lenience, I should say, on some of the CORI laws here in Massachusetts. And I also support an industry in construction that's CORI friendly. So I think that as mayor of Boston, I mean, I would certainly love to sit down and talk to people who are incarcerated, to go through the list and to see how I can be more helpful. But one thing that we can do is, I think what we need is more reentry programs. Because I think that people don't quite, you know, you take somebody off the street that, whatever, drug deal, and you put them in jail, they come out, if they don't go to a reentry program, they end up back in the same corner they were on, and they don't know any other way of life. So I think it's important for us to have.
So how do you resolve if you view it as a conflict, so how do you resolve the conflict between the fact that some LGBT people, particularly ones of color, are often discriminated against to the point where, you know, they can't get jobs, they can't get education, things we talked about, and due to society being that way, a lot of them have to resort to things like sex work or robbing or selling drugs to make a living and to get by. So how do you kind of resolve?
Well, one thing you said is people don't have an opportunity to get education. Everybody has an opportunity to get an education at some point. I mean, you have that opportunity. And I think what we have to do here in Boston, and where the issues, where we have problems in the LGBT community, particularly of incarcerated men or women, we have to make sure that there are programs that are specifically set up through the different social service agencies in Boston to make sure that people have a place to go. And we have to do something about that. I mean, I don't know how big of an issue it is. I mean, I'm sure you can tell me. But what I mean by that, I'm not being funny. I'm just, you know, it's the first time it's come up to me. You know, I generally, when we talk about incarceration and post-incarceration, people are talking in general terms about it. I know it's certainly hard to get a job after you're incarcerated. And I think as mayor of Boston, there's a lot we can do around that as far as when we have companies coming into Boston doing some workforce development and specific training and working with our nonprofits in the city of Boston to make sure that we're able to help people. And I also, I'll keep going back to it, but I think reentry programs is a place where we can do an awful lot of good for people, just to make sure that there's specific programs.
Okay. I think I'll have time for about 2 more questions, but on the same leg, let's just talk about crime. You know, with the Boston Marathon, Boston received a lot of attention around senseless acts of violence. But what hasn't been reported as much are some of the shootings that have occurred since the Boston Marathon. And in fact, the number is up to 85 shootings since the Boston Marathon. And a good number of those are in your district of Dorchester. So I'm curious to learn what you've done over the years to help reduce crime, and as mayor, what will you do differently?
Okay. First of all, I think a lot of those shootings were reported. However, unfortunately, I think a lot of neighborhoods have become immune to it, and it's which is a sad statement here. And I think that as mayor of Boston, it's one of my priorities as far as dealing with the violent crime in the inner cities, in the Dorchester areas, parts of Mattapan and parts of Hyde Park. It's something that we have to do. I mean, I've done some legislative things up there as far as funding different programs, but I've actually been on the street talking to kids that are gang members and trying to talk to them about another pathway. And as recently as about 4 months ago, I sat down with 3 kids from Cape Verdean gang to talk about there's another pathway for their life and trying to understand exactly how do we try and get these kids out of that culture, how do we get them out of that mindset. And it's not that simple. This is a complex issue. Where we have kids in our city that can't walk home maybe 2 blocks down the street, where they have to go, you know, 3/4 of a mile around the neighborhood to get home. It's all about the turf, it's all about the sidewalk. And I've done a lot of work in my career working with different groups and different people and trying to deal with this issue. As mayor of Boston, one of the reasons why I want to be mayor of Boston is to address this issue head on. I think the ministers have done some great work. I think the police have done some good work. The courts have done some good work. The street work program has done some good work. But we still have a rise this summer alone. I mean, the alarming thing since the marathon, as you said, 85 shootings. The shootings have gone through the roof, and we're not talking about it. And I think that that's an issue. Also, in schools, One thing I find amazing after the marathon bombing, some of the schools, one of the schools I know, had a counseling service for parents to be able to talk about what happened because two of the children went to school at a school on the border. Yeah. And the week out, it was school vacation week. The next week, the kids came back and there was counselors there to talk to the kids about what happened. The little boy's death and his sister being severely injured. So I was asking a young woman a few weeks later who went to the Latin Academy. She was talking about a shooting in her class. A classmate of hers got shot. And I asked her, did they have counselors in the school to talk about it? And her answer was no. So we have to treat our kids that are witnessing this violent crime out there firsthand in some cases. We have to help them because what happens? They become immune to it, and it's automatically a kind of a sense of, in some cases, we need to avenge the death of somebody or shooting somebody. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that area, and that's one of the areas I look forward to working on and tackling and making a difference for the kids and the people of our city.
Okay, great. So I want to wrap up with what I call my little lightning round. So it's basically going to be 4 questions where I would love for you to finish the sentence. So, 4 or 5 words, 4 or 5 words only. Try to finish the sentence as best as you can. So my first one is, a more equal and just Boston requires.
Good paying jobs and affordable housing.
Great. A personal hero of mine is?
Of mine?
Of yours.
Good one. My father.
Okay. As a leader, I am looking to improve in the area of?
Education. Absolutely.
Okay.
Strengthening neighborhoods.
And lastly, to the Black and Latino LGBT community, I pledge.
To have my door open every day.
Okay. Great, thank you. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I want to thank you. I want to ask everyone that's watching this or reading this, please vote for Marty Walsh, and if you want to find more information, go on martywalsh.org.
Great, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. All right.